Millionaire refused to pay. His pregnant wife's hospital, bill his mistress, spent that money on a new man. Marissa Wellington never thought her life would unravel in a single night. She was married to James Wellington, a self-made millionaire whose charm and generosity seemed boundless until it all vanished the moment she needed him most. In her 7th month of pregnancy, with hospital bills looming, Marissa learned James had secretly funneled their funds toward his longtime mistress, Celeste Moore. But Celeste's betrayal cut even deeper. Instead of using the money for her own pursuits with James, she spent it on someone else entirely. Brace yourself for shocking twists, hidden agendas, and scandalous revelations as one woman fights for justice, her unborn child, and her own survival. Marissa Donovan grew up in the quiet suburbs of Riverside, California. Her life was anything but glamorous, marked by ordinary school days, family dinners, and part-time jobs to save for college. She was a high achiever, mostly by necessity, balancing precarious finances and a burning determination to create a better life for herself. Although her home life was stable in the sense that her parents, Martin and Denise Donovan, provided a loving environment, they didn't have the resources to send her to the fancy colleges her peers were aiming for. She was, however, resourceful enough to earn scholarships and eventually landed at the University of Southern California. It was during her final year of college that Marissa met James Wellington. Handsome, polished, and ambitious James was the son of a middle-class accountant, Gerald Wellington, and a part-time schoolteacher, Simone Wellington. What set James apart was his unwavering resolve to transform his modest upbringing into a story of astonishing wealth and success. By the time he crossed paths with Marissa, James was well on his way to making his first million in real estate. They met at a charity gala at USC, where James served as a guest speaker. He spoke about investing in properties in transitional neighborhoods, turning them into upscale communities. His speech resonated with Marissa, who admired his vision and philanthropic promise to improve the housing crisis. After the event, they struck up a conversation that stretched into the night. 2 months later, they were dating exclusively, and within a year they were married in a lavish ceremony in Malibu, attended by celebrities and close friends alike. In those early days, James showered Marissa with affection, highlighting her intelligence, her compassion, and her keen sense of responsibility. Whenever he spoke of her in public, he described her as the woman who balanced his head-in-the-clouds ambition with practicality and empathy. Marissa, for her part, found James's determination admirable, a refreshing change from the aimlessness she had encountered in previous relationships. Within a couple of years, James expanded his real estate empire, branching into high-end commercial spaces in Los Angeles and San Francisco. The money poured in. Their personal lives, however, became more complicated. James began working 14-hour days, traveling frequently, and establishing a circle of powerful friends who seemed to spend more time at lavish parties than nurturing the philanthropic endeavors that had once defined him. Marissa brushed aside most of these concerns, attributing them to the inevitable busyness of a man with major deals on the line. After all, whenever James was home, he was doting and caring, quick to listen to her daily stories, and generous with gifts. She had no clue that beneath this curated exterior, a tangled web of lies was growing. When Marissa discovered she was pregnant, she was both elated and terrified. Elated because motherhood had always been a dream, and terrified because James's schedule showed no signs of letting up. She worried if James would be there for her appointments, for the ultrasound sessions, for the nights when her body ached, and the morning sickness overtook her. But James, upon hearing the news, appeared delighted. He promised to slow down, shift some of the business responsibilities to his partners, and be around more. Yet something never felt quite right. As Marissa's belly swelled, James grew distant. He'd miss important obstetric appointments with vague excuses. "I have a lunch with Stephen Harrington, the CEO of Harrington & Co., or, "I'm sorry, honey, I was tied up in traffic coming from Santa Barbara." One missed appointment turned into 3, and the most jarring part was the lack of remorse. A new tension seeped into their marriage, one that Marissa couldn't fully name or confront. But it was there, looming. Little did she know that James's restlessness was fueled by a new presence in his life, a woman whose name Marissa had yet to hear, Celeste Moore. And the quiet suburbs of Riverside, the grandeur of Malibu's wedding ceremony, and the philanthropic pledges James had once made would soon be overshadowed by a heartbreak that would shake Marissa's entire world. Celeste Moore was a woman who never disguised her ambitions. Raised in a cramped apartment in downtown Los Angeles, Celeste climbed her way out of poverty, using every advantage at her disposal, her striking beauty, her intelligence, and when necessary, her cunning. Her first encounter with James Wellington happened at an exclusive industry networking event at the Beverly Hills Hotel, where James was the keynote speaker. She hung on his every word, not just because of his success, but because his confidence radiated a magnetic energy that drew her in. During the cocktail hour, Celeste introduced herself as a rising interior designer, looking to collaborate with luxury real estate moguls. James, enthralled by her style and directness, found himself in a conversation that lasted far longer than he intended. That evening ended with exchanged phone numbers and a promise to talk business. Though both understood, the subtext ran deeper than mere interior design consultations. James initially rationalized his communications with Celeste as purely professional. He considered bringing her on as a consultant for one of his high-end residential developments. She sent him digital mood boards, sketches for penthouses, and material suggestions that were indeed impressive. But beneath the business email threads were messages laced with flirtation. "I can't stop thinking about our conversation, or would love to grab a nightcap and talk about lighting options," among other things. Eventually, what started as fancy dinner meetings slid into weekend getaways under the guise of corporate retreats. If there was guilt on James's part, it was buried under layers of self-justification. Business was booming. He was exhausted. His wife wasn't always available for spontaneous jet-setting, and Celeste offered a thrilling escape. Celeste wasn't just a fling. She listened intently as James complained about the stress of impending fatherhood, his anxiety over whether he'd be a good provider in terms of emotional presence. She massaged his ego, reassuring him that he deserved the best in life, a phrase that became her mantra. Over time, James grew dependent on her attention, her strategic compliments, her unyielding support of his grandeur. Unbeknownst to James, Celeste was studying him as meticulously as a hawk studies its prey. She noted his preferences, his love for vintage wines, his penchant for tailored suits, his weakness for being praised as a visionary entrepreneur. She cultivated the perfect persona, part cheerleader, part confidant, part seductress. When James would hint at marital discord or the difficulties of supporting a pregnant wife, Celeste's response was always the same. "You need to put yourself first sometimes." James eventually, their relationship solidified into a full-blown affair. While Marissa suspected late nights and questionable text messages, she had no concrete proof. She was also heavily pregnant and emotionally tired, so she avoided confrontation, hoping that her husband's odd behavior stemmed from business stress. She wanted to maintain harmony for the sake of her unborn child. For James and Celeste, secrecy was paramount. James would stash evidence of their trysts by registering under fake names at boutique hotels or using business accounts to foot the bills. He'd gift Celeste diamond earrings and designer handbags, always with the unspoken rule that she should never flaunt them in circles that intersected with Marissa's. For a while, the arrangement seemed sustainable. Marissa remained in the dark, and Celeste basked in the lavish attention. But affairs are rarely kept hidden forever. Celeste, emboldened by James's affection, began coaxing him to secure her future with more concrete gestures. She wanted more than just fancy dinners and weekend trips. She wanted real estate, a plush condo in a prime neighborhood. She wanted a seat at the table, perhaps even a title in one of James's companies. Every step of the way, James resisted such blatant demands, reminding her of the precariousness of their situation. Still, he found ways to appease her, transferring small fortunes into her personal accounts under the guise of consultant fees. These covert transfers were eventually noticed by James's CFO, Michael Stone, who flagged them as abnormal. James dismissed Michael's concerns, explaining them away as essential expansions of the business network. Yet each explanation sounded hollow, and the seeds of suspicion took root in the company. Rumors started swirling among some employees that James's personal life might be entangled with the business. One of James's business partners, Stephen Harrington, confronted him privately, cautioning him about mixing pleasure and corporate funds. James, confident in his ability to spin stories, brushed it off. Celeste, meanwhile, was getting restless. She understood the ephemeral nature of being the other woman. She recognized that once Marissa delivered the baby, James might feel a renewed sense of family duty. So she strategized if she couldn't get James to commit fully, she would ensure she left with enough to live the life she always dreamed of, preferably with or without him. She just needed the right moment, and that moment would collide with Marissa's impending hospital stay, a juncture that would blow the lid off James's double life in a way none of them saw coming. By the 8th month of her pregnancy, Marissa felt the weight of physical exhaustion and emotional uncertainty. She tried to remain composed, hoping James's frequent late nights would settle. She frequented prenatal yoga classes, read parenting books, and meticulously prepared a nursery filled with baby blue decor. Yet an undercurrent of anxiety gnawed at her every time she saw a text pop up on James's phone at odd hours, or received a lukewarm response when she asked for help assembling the crib. Despite these concerns, Marissa pushed forward. She wanted a tranquil environment when her child arrived. Her doctor, Amanda Price at Cedars-Sinai, warned her about stress and its potential impact on both mother and baby. So Marissa channeled her energy into positivity. She listened to calming music, attended therapy sessions, and even started journaling about her dreams for their family. In these entries, she envisioned a supportive James doting on their newborn, a scenario she prayed would become real. A week before her due date, Marissa had her regular checkups draw Doctor. Price frowned at the blood pressure readings slightly elevated and advised her to remain vigilant. The next day, Marissa woke up with mild contractions. Anxiety surged in her chest as she tried to reach James. His phone went straight to voicemail, and her texts remained unread. Over the past month, she'd grown used to his sporadic communication. But this was different. She was in pain alone and scared. She finally called her cousin, Gillian Donovan, who lived nearby. Gillian rushed over, alarmed by Marissa's pale face and trembling hands. They decided to go to the hospital. While in the emergency department, Marissa sent frantic messages to James. "I'm in the hospital. Please come. It might be the baby." More unanswered calls, more texts lost in the void. Hours later, Marissa was admitted for close monitoring. The The contractions subsided, but her blood pressure remained high, a warning sign for potential complications. Dr. Price recommended a brief hospital stay for observation. It was at this point that Marissa, still worried about James, decided to call his office. Michael Stone picked up, sounding concerned. He mentioned that James had left the office unexpectedly around noon, citing a personal errand. Michael promised to relay the urgent message to him. Night fell with no appearance from James. By the following morning, Marissa's condition stabilized enough for her to be discharged. Still no sign of her husband. Embarrassment and anger mingled in her heart. She felt humiliated to be explaining to the nurses why her husband wasn't at her side. Gillian tried to comfort her, suggesting a million possible reasons: an accident, a dead phone battery, a family emergency. Each excuse felt increasingly hollow. Finally, on the second morning, James strolled into the hospital room, carrying a bouquet of lilies, Marissa's least favorite flower. It was a small oversight, but it spoke volumes to Marissa, who had specifically told him months ago that lilies reminded her of funerals. Instead of offering an apology, James launched into an elaborate explanation about an investor meeting in Santa Barbara that took longer than expected, forcing him to stay overnight. He claimed his phone had died, and he had been too consumed by critical business negotiations to see her messages. Marissa's tears weren't just about his absence. They were about the obvious cracks in his story. She had called his office only to learn he left midday. Yet here he was, talking about late-night investor dinners and morning negotiations. The more he insisted on his alibi, the more her heart hardened. Nonetheless, she clung to the hope that he would step up, especially given her delicate condition. As she was discharged, the hospital staff mentioned a deposit issue with her insurance. Marissa felt a jolt of panic. James had always managed their finances and assured her he had top-tier coverage. Before leaving, she settled part of the bill with her personal savings, convinced that James would reimburse her soon. He mumbled something about transferring the funds. Gillian watched silently, biting her lip, noticing how uncharacteristically subdued James seemed. Once home, Marissa confronted James, demanding honesty. Instead of addressing her concerns, he grew defensive, accusing her of not trusting him and of overreacting due to pregnancy hormones. The argument escalated until James stormed out, leaving Marissa in tears. Her greatest fear took root: that she would be left alone to face childbirth, and that in his absence she might discover truths more devastating than anything she had imagined. What Marissa did not know, and what would soon come to light, was that James had funneled a substantial sum of money into Celeste's account, money that Marissa believed was earmarked for her upcoming hospital stay. And while Marissa was clinging to hope for a husband's redemption, Celeste was already making plans to use that cash on someone else. James Wellington's financial empire was vast: dozens of properties across California, multiple commercial complexes, and an intricate array of holding companies. On the surface, it all appeared legitimate. Behind closed doors, however, James was orchestrating a dangerous balancing act. He was using various corporate accounts to funnel money to Celeste under the radar. Though his CFO, Michael Stone, had raised red flags, James dismissed the concerns with authoritative confidence, reminding Michael of his place in the hierarchy. Yet James knew he was treading on thin ice. As Marissa approached her due date, the hospital bills for a private suite and specialized care were bound to be substantial. James had promised Marissa the best care money could buy. He'd boasted about paying for top-tier insurance and handling every expense. But the reality, those funds were tangled in the labyrinthine roots he used to keep Celeste content. For Celeste's part, she was no novice at handling hush money. She received James's deposits through shell accounts set up by a friend in the finance sector. Whenever James grew wary or expressed doubt, Celeste reminded him of the discretion she provided, subtly threatening to expose him if he withdrew his support. James's fear of losing everything, his reputation, his business partnerships, and possibly even the respect of his influential peers, made him cave each time. But Celeste wasn't just saving for herself. She had a new man in her crosshairs, a personal trainer named Rico Salazar. Rico was a polar opposite of James, 10 years younger, carefree, with a passion for motorcycles, and a knack for making Celeste feel alive. She met him at an upscale gym in West Hollywood, where she'd recently joined to maintain her figure and spot potential high-net-worth clientele for future design projects. Their flirtation began innocently enough, but soon Celeste found herself smitten with Rico's daring charm. He in turn was impressed by her financial freedom, though he suspected she had some wealthy backer. Eventually, Celeste decided to invest in Rico. He dreamed of opening a high-end fitness studio, a place where celebrities and socialites would pay premium rates for an exclusive training experience. Celeste saw an opportunity to secure not only a piece of that business, but also the admiration of a man who didn't come with James's baggage. Over late-night drinks, Celeste casually mentioned she might be able to bankroll Rico's venture if the terms were right. His eyes lit up, and she felt a surge of power. As Celeste ramped up her spending on Rico's potential business, James was hit with new waves of anxiety. Marissa's due date was days away, and he had to settle the hospital's retainer. His liquid assets were tied up, and pulling money from personal investments would raise eyebrows among his business partners. The truth was that, in a span of months, James had diverted a dangerously large chunk of capital to Celeste. Still, James clung to the illusion he could juggle it all, keep Celeste placated, pay Marissa's medical bills, and maintain the facade of a stable home life. Then came the day Marissa needed to be admitted for early labor. The hospital administrators requested an upfront payment to cover the costs not handled by insurance. James scrambled, rummaging through his accounts, only to realize he was short. He tried to push the payment onto a corporate credit line, but it was near its limit. Panicked, he called Celeste, demanding she return part of the money until he could free up more funds. Celeste scoffed at the request. She had already committed a sizable portion toward the lease and renovation costs for Rico's studio refunding. James would mean halting construction, losing a prime spot in West Hollywood, and possibly exposing her to Rico as less financially stable than she had claimed. She also sensed this might be the turning point where James might break off their arrangement for good. So she deflected, insisting she couldn't return the money yet, that it was tied up in contractual obligations. She also mentioned, with feigned regret, that she thought James had everything under control for Marissa's bills. In that moment, James realized just how far he had fallen. He was at the mercy of a mistress whose demands only escalated, while his pregnant wife lay in a hospital bed, expecting him to fulfill the pledge he had made months ago. In a haze of frustration and desperation, James let slip a venomous remark. "Why should I pay for her anyway? She's the one who wanted a baby." Celeste seized on that moment of callousness, encouraging James that he deserved better, all the while quietly funneling more of his money to ensure Rico's studio had its grand opening without delay. Soon, the tension in James's life would reach a breaking point. Marissa was in labor, the hospital demanded payment, and James had to make a choice, come clean, and risk losing everything or continue the lie and let the hospital bills slide, putting Marissa and the baby's well-being in jeopardy. The consequences of his decision would reverberate not just through his marriage, but across the entire empire he had built. Marissa's labor began in the early hours of a humid Los Angeles morning. At first she believed it was another false alarm. Braxton Hicks contractions had plagued her for weeks. But the pain quickly intensified. Gillian rushed her to the hospital while calling James, leaving frantic voicemails as Marissa's contractions grew stronger. Exhausted and frightened, Marissa clutched Gillian's hand, half focused on breathing techniques and half consumed by mounting anxiety over James's absence. By the time they arrived at Cedars-Sinai, hospital staff prepared for a potentially complicated delivery because of Marissa's elevated blood pressure. Still, they assured her she'd receive top-of-the-line care. But then came the discussion about payment. Marissa's insurance only covered part of the costs. The hospital needed a down payment for her private room, and the specialized team Dr. Price had assembled, including a neonatal specialist on standby. James had promised to take care of it all. Yet when the billing department looked up James's account, the deposit was missing. The administrator pulled Gillian aside and explained the situation in hushed tones. Gillian, outraged and bewildered, called James incessantly, but again his phone went straight to voicemail. Back in the hospital room, Marissa tried to focus on the breathing exercises. Inhale for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds. The beep of the fetal monitor reminded her that a new life was coming into the world, a life dependent on her strength and courage. Amid the excruciating contractions, fear gripped her heart. Fear that she was on her own, that James had abandoned her at the most critical juncture of her life. Finally, James burst into the room, looking disheveled and smelling faintly of alcohol. His tie was askew, and he held his phone in his hand, muttering something about it, dying on him again. Marissa was beyond words. Gillian, standing at her bedside, glared at him. A confrontation was brewing, but before it could erupt, a contraction ripped through Marissa, drawing everyone's attention back to the immediate concern. The baby's safe delivery. Dr. Price informed them Marissa needed an emergency C-section due to signs of fetal distress and complications with her blood pressure. Marissa's eyes welled up, her breath shallow. She looked at James, praying he'd step into the role of supportive husband. He squeezed her hand mechanically, murmuring that everything would be fine. He stepped away when the nurse ushered him out to change into sterile scrubs. In the surgical suite, Marissa fought a haze of panic as the medical team moved swiftly. James stood by her head, but his attention seemed divided. He kept glancing at his phone, texting someone. The tension in the room was palpable. Within minutes, the piercing cry of a newborn filled the air. A baby boy, healthy, despite the ordeal, was lifted by Dr. Price and shown briefly to Marissa and James before being taken for a quick examination. Tears streamed down Marissa's cheeks, a mixture of relief and heartbreak. She had never felt so vulnerable, so terrified, and yet so profoundly grateful that her son was alive. The mood shifted when the hospital's billing department representative approached James in the waiting area. The deposit issue had not been resolved. The private room Marissa was occupying came with significant costs, and insurance only covered part of it. James was asked to settle the amount immediately. Looking frazzled, he tried to use a corporate card, but the transaction was declined. He then attempted a personal credit card. Declined again. Panic settled on his face as Gillian, who overheard, demanded an explanation. Without another option, James wrote a personal check, hoping that he had enough in his checking account. But deep down, he suspected it might bounce, due to the massive funds he had been wiring to Celeste. Meanwhile, Marissa, still in post-operative care, was unaware of the financial storm brewing just outside her door. Over the next 48 hours, the stress mounted. James's check bounced, and the hospital administrator threatened to involve collections. Gillian fronted part of the payment with her own savings, furious that James, a so-called millionaire, couldn't handle the bill. Rumors swirled among some hospital staff was James facing bankruptcy. Had he been lying about his wealth? Marissa, recovering from major surgery, was beset by exhaustion and confusion. When Gillian finally told her the truth, James had failed to pay the hospital. The final blow came when Marissa checked her bank account to see that every penny she'd contributed had gone toward a fraction of the costs. She felt betrayed, humiliated, and overwhelmed by the magnitude of James's negligence. In the throes of new motherhood, clutching her swaddled infant boy, Marissa realized the horrifying truth: she could rely on no one but herself. The illusions of financial security and marital unity were shattered, and outside that hospital room, James was about to face consequences that would change his life forever, because Celeste was about to make a power move that would destroy any lingering notion of control James thought he had. While Marissa was in the hospital, Celeste Moore was busy orchestrating her own grand plans. She'd leveraged James's financial support to secure a prime piece of real estate in West Hollywood, perfect for Rico Salazar's upscale fitness studio. Contractors were already remodeling the space, and Celeste hovered over every detail with an eagle eye, determined to create a polished showcase that would captivate LA's elite. A week prior, she'd even traveled with Rico to check out the space, discussing design elements and potential branding strategies. Under normal circumstances, she might have sought James's input. After all, he was the real estate mogul, but she knew better than to do that now. The business and the man behind it was her secret, bankrolled with James's money, but tailored for Rico's future success. One evening, after receiving anxious messages from James about the hospital payment, Celeste decided it was time to flex her power. Instead of responding to his increasingly desperate texts, she waited. Rico was at her condo, flipping through some property documents she had stored in a sleek leather folder. He paused, noticing James's name on a legal statement for a property transfer in which Celeste was listed as a consultant. "Are you sure this is legit?" he asked, eyeing her carefully. Celeste smirked. "It's as legit as it needs to be. I've earned it after all the time and energy I've spent supporting him." Rico shrugged, not fully invested in the moral implications, more concerned with whether their new venture could be compromised. Satisfied with her own confidence, Celeste texted James, "I'm busy. Deal with Marissa's bills yourself." James, on the verge of a breakdown, called her repeatedly that night. She answered once, letting him rant about how urgent it was to get funds back, how the hospital threatened collections. Celeste offered a calm, cold reply. "That's not my problem, James. You knew what you were getting into." She ended the call, leaving James spiraling. Emboldened, Celeste phoned Michael Stone directly the next day. She spun a carefully crafted story about James's alleged promises and her role as a consultant in his projects. She insisted she'd only received money for legitimate work. Michael, taken aback by her brazenness, tried to maintain professionalism, but sensed a labyrinth of lies swirling around them. Celeste's aim was to keep the business from retaliating against her once they uncovered the missing funds. By painting herself as a legitimate part of James's empire, she hoped to avert any lawsuits or attempts at asset recovery. Meanwhile, James was left juggling a crisis on multiple fronts. He owed the hospital a hefty sum, had no readily available funds to cover it, and faced a CFO who was closing in on the truth. His business partner, Stephen Harrington, demanded a meeting after hearing whispers of a financial discrepancy. James scrambled to appear in control, but every time he tried to patch one hole, another sprang open. In a desperate maneuver, James attempted to borrow from a private lender, only to discover that his reputation was already tarnished. Word in the real estate circles was that James Wellington was in trouble. Any major lending to him would be seen as high risk. Even his parents, Gerald and Simone Wellington, began asking awkward questions after hearing from longtime family friend Donna Harrington that things weren't adding up with James's finances. Marissa, recuperating at home, had become resigned to James's hollow apologies. Each day he'd promised to sort out the hospital debt, and each day she'd receive new calls from billing departments or insurance adjusters clarifying the shortfall. Gillian, who had temporarily moved in to help Marissa, wondered aloud how James, a so-called millionaire, could be so inept at paying a basic hospital bill. Every inquiry only deepened Marissa's sense of betrayal. Yet Celeste's final move, the one that would truly blindside James, had yet to unfold. Rico's fitness studio was nearing completion, but there was a small gap in funding for the final round of equipment purchases. Celeste had no intention of dipping into her own reserves. She wanted to siphon one last chunk from James before severing ties. With her typical cunning, she crafted a plan to get James to shell out more money under the guise of a business opportunity. She intended to exploit his desperation, offering him a chance to invest in a potentially lucrative venture that would yield quick returns money he could then use to solve his marital woes. The brilliance of her manipulation lay in how it appealed to James's greed and immediate need for cash flow. She dangled the carrot: invest $200. Now get a guaranteed 30% profit in 2 months. You'll have more than enough to pay off the hospital and restore your reputation. Given the walls closing in, James might just jump at this final bait. What Celeste didn't expect was the wild card about to enter the mix. Marissa, armed with a new resolve, was determined to unravel the web James had spun. And in doing so, she'd stumble upon Celeste's double dealings, inadvertently setting the stage for an explosive showdown that would leave no one unscathed. Marissa spent her postpartum weeks in a haze of sleepless nights and endless worry over finances. Every time she looked at her newborn son, Elijah, she felt a rush of fierce protectiveness. She'd named him Elijah without consulting James, a silent act of defiance. In this swirl of anger, sorrow, and maternal love, she decided she could no longer passively await James's next excuse. She needed answers, and fast. Unbeknownst to James, Marissa began piecing together clues. She started with their home office, scanning bank statements and credit card bills. To her shock, she discovered multiple large transfers labeled consultant fees to a name she'd never seen before: Celeste Moore. Then came extravagant charges at luxury hotels, restaurants, and even an upscale spa, all timed suspiciously during James's supposed business trips. Her heart hammered. She confronted Gillian, who admitted she'd suspected an affair, but didn't want to add more stress to Marissa's pregnancy. Red-eyed from fury and heartbreak, Marissa contacted Michael Stone. At first, Michael was reluctant to divulge any company details, citing confidentiality. But Marissa persisted, explaining that the finances in question were marital assets, and that she had a right to know where the money was going. Eventually, Michael opened up. He confirmed that the consultant fees had caught his attention months ago, and there seemed to be no legitimate work attached to them. He also mentioned that Celeste Moore had called him, directly insisting she was entitled to the funds. By the time Marissa ended the call, she had a clearer picture of James's betrayal, and something else that alarmed her: the possibility that James was heavily in debt, funneling money to a mistress who, according to Michael, might not be as loyal as James believed. Marissa felt physically ill. She called her lawyer friend, Rebecca Clark, for advice. Rebecca urged Marissa to protect herself financially, especially if James's assets were compromised. It was the push Marissa needed. Summoning courage she didn't know she had, Marissa confronted James in their living room one evening. Elijah slept in a bassinet nearby, a silent witness to their explosive argument. Marissa laid out the evidence: the bank statements, the phone records, the suspicious charges. James's face went pale, then red. He tried to deny it, claiming Celeste was a mere consultant, but Marissa pointed out the lavish personal expenses. "You left me in the hospital." "James," she spat, tears brimming. "You left me to beg for help while you played sugar. Daddy to some woman behind my back." James, cornered, finally admitted to the affair. He mumbled apologies, rationalizing that the stress of impending fatherhood drove him to Celeste. He insisted it was only physical at first, something to blow off steam. But it escalated. Now he feared Celeste was blackmailing him. He insisted he never intended to abandon Marissa financially, that everything just spiraled out of control. But Marissa refused to accept his meager explanations. Her mind whirled with the knowledge that James had lied repeatedly, even endangering her and their child's well-being. She demanded to know how much money was left, if any. James stumbled over half-answers, admitting he had invested heavily in a new venture that Celeste had promised would yield high returns soon. His voice trembled, betraying how uncertain he truly was. As Marissa listened, a numb resolve settled over her. She realized that her once loving husband, who had promised her a life of stability and support, had betrayed her in every way possible, emotionally, financially, spiritually. It was clear he had no plan to extricate himself from Celeste's grasp. He was ensnared by his own greed and fear, and he couldn't even muster the moral courage to face the consequences honorably. Watching him sink into the sofa, head in his hands, Marissa felt a surge of clarity. She decided she would protect herself and her son. She would no longer wait for James to remedy a situation that seemed beyond repair. She would contact her lawyer, freeze any remaining joint accounts, and ensure Elijah's future was secure regardless of James's next move. The path ahead promised no easy solutions, no quick fixes. But Marissa's maternal instincts drove her forward, determined to carve out a life untainted by the deceit of the man she once trusted. Little did she know Celeste was about to trigger the final act of this drama, a move that would bring both James and Marissa to their knees, and expose truths even Celeste herself hadn't anticipated. Celeste Moore's plan to secure one last windfall from James hinged on perfect timing. She proposed a $200,000 investment to jumpstart an exciting new project, guaranteeing James a hefty return that would solve his immediate cash flow crisis. She packaged it as a philanthropic synergy with a local fitness studio aiming to promote community wellness, hinting it could improve his tarnished public image. Despite his suspicions, James felt cornered. He needed money fast. So he signed over a check from one of his last remaining liquid accounts, hoping beyond hope that Celeste's proposition would pan out. But Celeste had no intention of sharing any profits with James. Once the funds cleared, she channeled the lion's share into Rico's new fitness studio. The remainder went into her personal offshore account, a safety net she'd meticulously built for years, funded by men like James, who fell for her seductive promises. She fully intended this to be her final coup de grace, after which she'd ghost James Wellington forever. As the construction on Rico's studio neared completion, Celeste planned an extravagant launch event, inviting local influencers, wealthy gym enthusiasts, and potential celebrity clients. Everything was scheduled to coincide with the day she'd vanish from James's life. A hush-hush memo to Rico's newly hired staff revealed that Celeste was the major backer behind the project, though her name didn't appear on any official documents linking her to James. From a legal standpoint, she had maneuvered so James would have no claim over the business. A week before the grand opening, Celeste called James under the guise of an update. She played up the excitement, claiming she had insider info that the studio's membership drive already had a wait list. She teased that the official opening ceremony would attract media coverage, painting James as a visionary investor. Relieved at the prospect of salvaging his image, James relaxed. Maybe he wouldn't be forced to sell off assets in shame. Meanwhile, Marissa discovered a $200,000 withdrawal from a joint account she thought had been nearly depleted. Furious, she demanded answers from James. He admitted he'd given the money to Celeste for a business deal that would benefit the family in the long run. The sheer audacity stunned her. "You used our last remaining funds for her," Marissa hissed. James tried to placate her, insisting that if this venture succeeded, they'd reap the benefits. But Marissa, recalling Celeste's manipulative track record, was unconvinced. She issued James an ultimatum: either recover the money or face imminent divorce proceedings. Desperate to appease Marissa, James attempted to contact Celeste, requesting a written contract or formal agreement, spelling out their deal. Celeste skillfully sidestepped every phone call and text, claiming to be busy with final arrangements for the launch. Anxiety consumed James. He had invested everything in this one last card, and he couldn't even confirm if it was legitimate. The night of the studio's soft launch arrived. James wasn't invited, but he decided to make a surprise appearance. He arrived at the venue wearing his best suit, forcing a confident stride, even though he trembled inside. The studio gleamed with polished floors, state-of-the-art equipment, and a crowd of beautiful people sipping champagne. Photographers milled about, snapping pictures of the influencers. A sense of foreboding clutched James's stomach as he searched for Celeste. Then he saw her radiant in a designer gown, laughing in a corner with a tall, handsome man. James recognized from a distance as Rico. The closeness between them, her hand resting on Rico's chest, her laughter echoing, was a harsh confirmation of the affair James had refused to fully acknowledge. Heart pounding, he pushed past the crowd. As he reached them, Celeste's face went white. "Where's my contract? Where's my money?" James demanded under his breath, trying not to cause a scene. Celeste smiled icily, offering a stinging retort. "There is no contract, James. And your money? It's already spent." Rico simply watched, arms folded, a slight smirk on his face. James felt the walls closing in as he realized he'd been conned. The digital cameras snapped away, capturing the tension in the air. Furious, James threatened legal action. Celeste shrugged, reminding him she had documents showing the money was a gift for her interior design work on multiple projects. She even hinted that she had intimate photos and text messages she could release to the press if James tried to smear her reputation. The crowd began to notice the heated exchange. Whispering stares, James stormed out, face aflame, the weight of utter humiliation pressing on him. He'd lost a fortune, his marriage was on the brink, and his carefully curated public persona was in shambles, all because of a mistress who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. When he arrived home, Marissa was packing a small suitcase, her wedding band left on the dresser. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice steady. "I'm taking Elijah and staying with Jillian for now," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Congratulations, James. You've managed to ruin our lives." James tried to speak, but she raised a hand, halting him. Gathering her newborn close, she walked out the door, leaving James alone in a once luxurious living room that now felt as barren as a tomb. In the days following Marissa's departure, James Wellington's life resembled a slow-motion car wreck. His boardroom meetings were charged with tension. Business partners and investors demanded answers about missing funds and were wary of further entanglements. Michael Stone, the CFO, resigned, unwilling to be complicit in James's financial fiascos. The word embezzlement hung ominously in the air, though no formal charges had been filed yet. James's attempts to reconcile with Marissa went nowhere. She would only communicate through her lawyer, Rebecca Clark, who delivered a carefully worded email outlining Marissa's conditions, immediate repayment of the hospital bills, a formal separation agreement, and provision for child support for Elijah Marissa, had also taken a protective step, filing for a legal separation and freezing any remaining joint assets. Left with an empty house and an even emptier conscience, James slipped into a haze of regret and self-pity. He tried calling Celeste to beg for at least a partial refund of the money. Each call went unanswered. Celeste had moved on, busy basking in the success of the new fitness studio she'd essentially funded with James's assets. She seemed untouchable. Even if James tried to sue, Celeste had an arsenal of evidence that might incriminate him as a willing participant in shady financial dealings. Spending sleepless nights in a once opulent mansion, James turned to his parents for help. Gerald and Simone Wellington were devastated to learn of their son's betrayal and financial recklessness. With solemn faces, they offered moral support, but declined to bail him out monetarily. They believed James needed to face the consequences of his actions to truly learn from them over tears and apologies. Simone insisted that no sum of money could fix the damage he'd done to his marriage and family. Gerald, usually stoic, admitted he was ashamed of how far his son had strayed from the values they instilled. As for Marissa, her days were consumed by caring for Elijah and meeting with legal counsel. Gillian's spare bedroom became her temporary sanctuary, a cramped space adorned with baby supplies and a makeshift crib. At night, she woke for feedings with a broken heart, recalling the once glamorous life she believed was secure. Still, she found strength in her love for Elijah, resolving to give him a stable environment even if James was absent. One afternoon, Marissa received a surprising phone call. Stephen Harrington, James's business partner. He expressed sympathy for her situation and offered a modest financial settlement to cover the hospital bills and immediate expenses, framing it as a gesture of goodwill from the company. At first, Marissa hesitated, suspecting a hidden agenda, but Stephen clarified that he had grown disillusioned with James's personal misconduct, and he believed the child shouldn't suffer. Reluctantly, Marissa accepted, feeling a flicker of relief that at least the looming hospital debt would be addressed. Meanwhile, Celeste found herself in a position of unexpected vulnerability. Even though she'd walked away with a substantial sum, her new man, Rico, wasn't as dedicated as she imagined. With the studio up and running, he got a taste of independence and the attention of wealthy clients. Celeste sensed him pulling away. Late-night texts went unanswered, and rumors floated that Rico was seeing a young actress who frequented the gym. Celeste, always the strategist, tried to tighten her hold on Rico by turning on her charm and reminding him of her financial contributions. But Rico shrugged it off. He had a booming new business, and he no longer needed Celeste's money, or by extension, Celeste herself. Without a stable partner or the comforting illusions of romance, Celeste was left to reckon with an uncomfortable truth. The lifestyle she carved out was precarious. She had enough money stashed away to live lavishly for a time, but the emotional toll of constantly manipulating and discarding people was beginning to wear on her. She sipped expensive champagne in her designer condo, feeling a pang of emptiness that even luxury couldn't fill. As Marissa and James hovered on the brink of a final legal battle, each navigated the consequences of their decisions. Marissa resolved to protect Elijah at all costs, forging ahead with custody arrangements and focusing on rebuilding her life from the ashes of James's empire. James, isolated and disillusioned, toyed with the idea of leaving Los Angeles altogether, imagining he might start fresh in another city. But fate had more cards to play. A single piece of unexpected news was about to force a confrontation between them, one that would either tear them apart permanently or push them toward a sliver of understanding. For as messy and brutal as their situation had become, the birth of Elijah introduced a new dimension, that neither could ignore. They were tied together forever by the life they brought into the world. A month passed in uneasy limbo. Marissa continued caring for Elijah at Gillian's small apartment, juggling the emotional and financial strains of single motherhood. She filed for an official divorce, which James contested, not necessarily because he hoped to salvage the marriage, but because he feared losing even more assets. Their legal battle teetered on the brink of hostility, with Rebecca Clark pushing aggressively for Marissa's rights. Then came the day that shifted everything. Marissa's father, Martin Donovan, suffered a heart attack. Frightened and overwhelmed, Marissa rushed to Riverside Community Hospital, baby in tow. In the swirling chaos of doctors and medical tests, she called James. Despite her anger, she knew Elijah's father deserved to know about this family crisis. James arrived with an uncharacteristic sense of humility. The hospital environment brought back painful memories of how he'd abandoned Marissa before, and guilt weighed heavily on his every step. He offered to cover any medical expenses for Martin, though Marissa bristled at the suggestion, remembering how worthless his promises had been in the past. But as the hours passed, their mutual concern for Martin's recovery forced them to interact calmly, if only for Elijah's sake. In a quiet waiting room, James sat next to Marissa, their baby asleep in her arms. Neither spoke at first, each grappling with a tangled mix of resentment, regret, and lingering affection. At length, James apologized, not just with words, but with an unguarded sincerity Marissa had never witnessed. He admitted every selfish motive, every time he justified cheating, every lie that he used to sustain his double life. Tears streamed down his face, a sight Marissa found both shocking and deeply unsettling. She, in turn, laid bare her pain, the betrayal, the fear for Elijah's future, the humiliation of being left alone in a hospital bed. It was a moment of raw confrontation, absent the artifice of lawyers or the pressure of a public scandal. And while forgiveness didn't come easily, Marissa recognized that if they were to co-parent Elijah, a degree of civility, perhaps even mutual support, would be necessary. They promised each other one thing: they would keep Elijah's well-being at the center of every decision, regardless of how fractured their relationship remained. A few days later, Marissa learned Martin's prognosis was promising. He would recover with the right medication and rest. Relieved, she returned to Gillian's place, where James visited to see Elijah. He came bearing a proposal for a custody arrangement that his new legal team drafted. To Marissa's surprise, the terms were fair and did not attempt to cheat her out of child support or deny her primary custody. In fact, James seemed ready to relinquish significant assets to ensure Elijah's comfort and Marissa's stability. This shift puzzled Marissa, but it also provided a slender thread of hope. Perhaps James was finally facing reality. He informed her he was liquidating certain properties to resolve debts, including the outstanding hospital bills. He mentioned he no longer had any contact with Celeste. He realized belatedly that she'd duped him and moved on to someone else. His property empire, once a towering testament to his ambition, was being downsized to salvage what remained of his reputation and livelihood. Meanwhile, Celeste's carefully curated world began to crumble. Rico, flush with success, discreetly transferred the fitness studio's ownership papers to a shell company under his name, leaving Celeste with little recourse. When she confronted him, he shrugged and told her she'd never been on any official documents, so she had no claim. Feeling blindsided for the first time in her life, Celeste found herself alone with only her offshore account as a lifeline. The irony stung. She'd built her fortune by exploiting men, and now she was on the receiving end of the same ruthless game. Marissa committed to moving forward, filed the final divorce papers, which James signed without protest, Their marriage was irreparably broken, but they reached a collaborative parenting agreement that gave Elijah a chance for stability. The scandal surrounding James's financial misdeeds gradually faded from the headlines, eclipsed by new controversies in the city's cutthroat real estate market. In the end, James was neither fully ruined nor entirely redeemed. He took ownership of his mistakes and learned to navigate a more modest lifestyle. Marissa, buoyed by the support of her family and friends, found an unexpected reservoir of strength within herself. She pursued a part-time consulting job in non-profit housing, an echo of the philanthropic passion that once drew her to James. Their story, rife with betrayal and suffering, didn't end in fairy tale reconciliation, yet a fragile hope threaded through the wreckage that from their mistakes they could forge healthier futures for themselves and, most importantly, for Elijah. As for Celeste, rumors whispered she'd left Los Angeles searching for fresh opportunities elsewhere. Whether she'd ever find contentment beyond the glitter of wealth and the thrill of manipulation remained an open question, one that might haunt her forever. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of love, deception, and hard-won lessons. Marissa's heartbreak and her determination to protect her child highlight the resilience born from life's darkest moments. James's downfall reminds us that unchecked ambition and betrayal inevitably exact their toll, while Celeste's cunning tactics serve as a cautionary tale about the emptiness lurking behind greed-driven schemes. If you found yourself caught up in this high-stakes drama, if you felt Marissa's pain, James's desperation, or Celeste's manipulative allure, please show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel to ensure you never miss another gripping story. Your engagement helps us continue creating the narratives that captivate, inspire, and challenge us to reflect on our own choices. So spread the word. Join our community and stay tuned for more real-life drama and heartfelt tales. Your support makes all the difference.